I've been waiting for you.
Alan, you're having a nightmare.
That's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to scare anybody.
Don't you understand? You're a machine, Alan, a mechanical device. Is that straight enough for you?
I read you loud and clear.
Alan, you idiot.
Welcome to episode 21 of Green Crush. 21 is the symbol of the person centered on the object or himself. Ooh.
Alan, how do you feel?
You've had your whole fucking life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
It's crush time, it's Green Crush time, and oh boy, have we got a show for you today. We have a fantastic guest from Australia. We do have listeners in Australia, and I'm very excited that one of them is Rhys Cohen. And Rhys, this is going to be tough for my Canadian listeners to understand what's going on here, but Rhys is, he could better explain it himself, but we don't have this in Canada. We really can't translate very well. This is a system and a means of using cannabis to build a new business. Maybe something that the government doesn't have its fingers into. Maybe something that is constructive rather than restrictive. And Rhys Cohen is definitely that fellow. And we're going to be going, like I said earlier, to a lot of places around the world rather than dealing with these parochial idiots in Canada. And I wanted to cleave that off nice and cleanly because it deserves it. But there's always some new crazy thing that pops up, and you have to deal with it. So this is definitely one of those times. We're going to talk about the licensed producers in Canada just completing a circle jerk wank fest last week. Like there's not enough bad optics in Hollywood right now. It's kind of nauseating. I am looking forward to this year's the next Oscars to see what kind of in memoriam they're going to do for people like Harvey Weinstein's career, etc. That's what I'm looking forward to. But it is a bit of a disgusting situation, a self-congratulatory wank, as I say. And, of course, the licensed producers who have been working so hard to lobby government to shut down dispensaries that already know what they're doing if they're left to do it properly and exercise what's known as the distant, wistful, smelly smell traces of democracy. Just wafting away. And these folks were having let's sit around and talk about how great we are as these licensed producers. So we're going to talk about their little Jack Fest and talk about some of the mindsets of some of the people involved in quashing folks who have been compassionate enough to risk the law, to risk the order, to bring comfort to people such as myself who might have been laboring from a very severe disease. But these people are all about the money. It's strictly a commodity. It might as well be bottled water. It might as well be booze. It might as well be the stock market. It might as well be Bitcoin. With these very shallow people. And, you know, I don't always do my research, so when I heard about the event itself as a get-together with folks in the industry, I actually bought tickets. That's how stupid I can be. We all make mistakes, not that all of us ever admit that. But I certainly did admit making the mistake of purchasing tickets for myself and to go to this thing, and I authorized Kim, our producer, to get these tickets, and God, we couldn't go because other more important things came up, even if it had been the good stuff. And we couldn't make it. We couldn't attend. And so we watched it online later. Yeah, we watched it online, and there was such a we almost had a nausea reaction. I'm not going to say we literally puked because people literally use the word literally far too often. But we were very uneasy, and more so than wasting the $20 a ticket or whatever it was. I was just disappointed that I didn't research into it. But to my defense, I thought this young, new, burgeoning industry would have something relatively exciting to bring forward in the way of developments and/or freedoms under the new cannabis paradigm that we're sliding into. But no, it was just a self-congratulatory, disgusting kind of a situation. A lot of nice people wearing a lot of nice clothing to attend a back patting session. And we're going to get into some of that later. I have some clips from the event that I'm sure you'll find synthesized to support my point. But I always do that. Anyway, we're going to talk with Rhys Cohen. He'll be on the line shortly. Can't dial him up right now. I've only got one outfeed on my computer. But Cannabis Culture Australia recently sat down with Cann10. That's Cann 10. That's Australia's Rhys Cohen is in charge of this thing, or a spokesman thereof. He'll talk all about it. And they have an Australian medical cannabis leadership program, which is coming to Australia in September. Now, this is already December. I know there's a time difference between ourselves and Australia, but I don't think it's a few months. So we'll hear all about what it is to set up the Australian Medical Cannabis Leadership Program. This is a fascinating deal with Cann10 Medicinal Cannabis Leadership Program, Australia's first training program in the field of medicinal cannabis. Now, that's why I was mocking Canada, because Canada doesn't even admit that it has healthful properties. I've already spoken to Kathleen Wynne, jump back a couple of episodes, the premier, and she says this dialogue will continue, and she's gone mute again. She tweets every day, or her team does, and puts out some propagandic bullshit piece of information about how Ontario is seeking to build a better economy and we're looking for ideas and how can we better improve our bottom line and employ our young people, etc. And then they have a padlock, an officer of the law provided padlock on the notion of democratic flourishing within an industry that features chemicals barfing into the sky? No. Toxic sludge from corporations pissing into our water supplies and ruining our lives by either causing disease or changing the makeup and constitution of our sperm and thus weakening it over the decades? No. We're just talking about a plant that now has to be put in jail itself, the way they're going to be distributing this product here in Canada, unless I can have something to do with it. I will be calling for full boycotts. Let's just do that now. Full boycott of government weed. A full boycott of every single purveyor. All 40 of them in Ontario, which haven't opened yet. And understand Dana Larson, a very intelligent author and very much so an activist. This guy was way deep into the scene before I even heard of it, and he has pointed out a lot of the nonsense with this issue, and so has Mark Emery, the wife of whom, Jody Emery, we had on the show last week. Mark points out specifically that there are 10,000 places in Ontario, this province where Toronto sits, where you can obtain alcohol. Bars, restaurants, your friend's house, alcohol, wine stores, all of that. 10,000 outlets for alcohol, which they need to classify it as the same and dangerous as. Cannabis has to be as dangerous as this, but miraculously we're only going to have 40 stores. Imagine the trouble when you're living in one of the many, let's call it the majority, because these folks don't even know what the majority means anymore, the majority of towns and regions that have legitimate cannabis patients who would like to get some cannabis. They'll have legitimate purchasers who are not choosing to use it in a medical way, even though you always are. And they are going to need to drive or get themselves on a Greyhound bus, maybe, to a different town to partake of cannabis in Canada and watch these cops set up their little plastic toys at the side of the road to be pulling people over all the time. You know, the way they don't do sitting across the street from a police bar where those guys get hammered on booze, and no one seems to be stationed just outside of that parking lot with those porcine individuals stumbling out of the bar getting ready for another shift tomorrow. So I'm kind of off on a tangent here, but that's what this show is. Let's get back to Rhys Cohen. Their program there, the Cannabis Leadership Program, rather than the Cannabis Hide in a Closet, It's Not Good For You program like these punks have rolled out in Canada. This program provides a comprehensive approach to cannabis education, including historical, cultural, legal, regulatory, commercial, chemical, and agricultural aspects, a.k.a. the fucking science and knowledge behind how this works so well. And we don't like to talk about that here when all the cops sit around and discuss how to parse out profits and how to punish people who have already been providing this information. And now they've been marginalized already before by doing time and having their lives ruined. And now these cops are at the helm, and these corporations are at the helm to fully enjoy the clear walkway into a new paradigm that we, several of us, hundreds of thousands, let's say millions of people around the world have been banging on this door long enough, protesting arrests long enough, and you thought we might be able to go through first, but through trickery and by deception, they've decided that we are all still criminals. It's still a bad thing to sell, but they're happy to take all of the profits from it. So imagine someone associated with the government-sanctioned idea to study the historical, cultural, legal, regulatory, commercial, etc. And we will be getting into a little history of cannabis today as well, also courtesy of a Canadian politician. And that's kind of embarrassing because wait till you hear from this guy. He is... we should be proud of him, really, because he's mentally diminished and he somehow holds a seat. So you have to cast a shady eye on the town that put him there. The area that put him there is Lacombe, Alberta, and Ron Orr somehow managed to tie his shoelaces and chew gum at the same time well enough to fill out the papers to become a member of the Legislative Assembly in Alberta. Although now that he's there, it's a perfect example of how a person who swears against cannabis, thinks it's the worst thing ever, can somehow spew such nonsense. No wonder he's worried about a mind-altering substance of some repute. So, yeah, let's move on to some ads before we bring our guest on, Rhys Cohen. He's going to be waiting there shortly. We do have some ads, and let's crank up a little bit of background music for this. Okay, here we go. God, I need a couple more hands. Like, we really should have an octopus in here doing this gig, I think. That would be nice. All right. I want to talk to you about the Truth Seeker app. The Truth Seeker app is an app that you can get either on iOS, or which is the Apple system, or you can get it, with Android. Sorry, I don't know the technical term. I don't do the Android thing, but I think it's called Android. Anyway, the Truth Seeker app is an app that brings you all kinds of fantastic programs. I'm going to say it just like this one, and just like my previous show that's still out there, all 94 episodes. Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. Check that out, will you? And I really want you to check that out if you are a fan of the show. This is going to help us a ton. If you go over to conspiracyqueries.com and, take a look at some of the topics there. That's how I started this podcasting, broadcasting game as a conspiracy host, where I simply ask questions about conspiracies. How has this got to do with, what has this got to do with Truth Seeker app? Well, Truth Seeker app is actively helping Green Crush reunite the several 100,000 folks who have downloaded Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, and then they wondered what happened to me when I disappeared, being taken out with a little old case of stage 4 cancer. So that's a bit of a drag. And but now I'm back, and it turns out a lot of these folks don't even know I was gone. So I'm just curious. That's Russell there. Russell's always sticking his fingers where they belong. And we're looking forward to moving on with this plan that the Truth Seeker app has come up with, and we are trying to get you folks to listen to Conspiracy Queries. There are 94 episodes there, rather evergreen, and so check it out. I think you will be very, very happy, especially if you dial back, the last 6 or 7 episodes, and particularly the last 4, from 90 to 94. Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, worth your while if you do listen to this show. Also, there's iTunes. Go to iTunes, where we're downloaded and can be downloaded, and where we put together a fan base, so to speak, of podcast downloaders. And you can go there and please comment on this show, comment on Conspiracy Queries. All of this is going to help us continue. And I know that's not always possible for people to contribute money, but the Truth Seeker app is helping us with this, and you will find on the Truth Seeker app all kinds of wonderful shows. You'll find some left-leaning shows there, you will, and you'll also find some right-leaning shows and some other historical, fascinating, interesting shows that don't rely on political slants. Always worth your time. The Truth Seeker app. And finally, for commercials today, let's talk to Danny Mendlow. Danny is in the studio today. I don't know if you can see him or not, or what's going on. Danny's in the corner there. Danny is a producer of a cannabis-themed show based here in Toronto. We're getting some interest with that show, and Danny's been involved with this show for quite some time now, several months. Danny, tell us the name of the show and why you're here today, and lean in on the mic. Oh gosh. Say it again?
It's this show with you.
Oh, it's this show?
Yeah.
Oh, good. And that's called Green Crush with Alan Park.
That's correct. Yeah.
So Danny Mendlow is also, he's the, we have a trio here, 3 people. And Russell. Russell's like, the 5th Beatle, only there's 4 of us. And so Danny is a producer, and we have needed to get some kind of funding going on because the lights are literally going off at Operation Central. And so as I say,
that's the glass half empty look. I mean, the reality is people are clamoring to give us money, so we just had to set up a way for them to do that.
Right. Well, that's true too. Well, I don't know. Is clamoring too strong of a word?
It might be. Yeah.
It might.
It might be a little.
Might be a little thick.
Stronger than the reality.
But it's fair to say some people have been clamoring, and we're trying to get other people to maybe not clamor, but just be mildly interested, and then gradually grow to a clamor.
Yes.
And we spell clamor with a U, just like they do in Australia.
Sometimes, depending. Most of our listeners are American now, so we're going to have to drop the U's.
Oh, yeah. It means I have to write things that have a little red squiggly line at the bottom.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But
tell us how it works.
So we set up a little crowdfunding platform. It's Patron.
Patron, not Patreon, but
no.
Patron.
patron.podbean.com/greencrushpod. And we threw that up last night because we had a couple people asking where they could send their money. And we already have a couple people signed up. It's still a work in progress, as is the show, as is the entire paradigm shift, which is what we're talking about every week here on the show.
Yeah, it keeps expanding, so thanks for that. And so they go to Patron, Patron,
yeah.
.podbean.com
/greencrush.
Well, that all makes sense. I'm familiar with those words. I just didn't ever put them in that order before.
And the links are all out on our social media, or if you do some Googling, you can find it. Bear with us. Like I said, I just set this up pretty quickly last night, but we're going to be adding some great perks from friends in the business. If you are a friend in the business, if you're starting a company, as a lot of people are, or you're growing a company, get in touch. We'd love to promote your product, maybe give it away as a prize package, maybe do an advertisement with the one and only Alan Park and his wonderful voice.
I'll do it. I'll definitely do it. But what I won't do is I don't think we're going to be able to get a licensed producer on the show because they've already had cold feet. at backing someone who, effectively rips into the whole notion of licensed producers. I know they're going to be there. I didn't know they were going to be as disgusting as having a self-congratulatory Oscars festival last week. So,
right. Well, I mean, you're the talent, so you rip into whoever you want.
Yeah.
But if somebody's not listening close enough and still wants to give us their money, I'll take it.
oh yeah, sure, yeah. If you get a licensed producer who wants to throw money our way, that's fine. But we're trying to get seed companies. We're trying to get growing companies. We're equipment companies. If you provide exhaust fans or something of this nature, because the focus of this show isn't to mollycoddle the government outlets that are going to try to strip down the tax. This is a full pirate operation. I'm saying grow your own, don't ask permission, get the tools, get the seeds, get the earth, get the minerals, do it properly, go hydroponic if you need to, or choose dirt, whatever you like, but do it yourself. Don't rely on these people to provide substandard chuff at a premium. Especially when, as soon as the next budget comes in, they're going to add 50 cents or $1 to every gram. And in Ontario, it's $1 a gram. So you're paying $454 tax on a pound. And, that's fair because it's a medicine. I remember paying by the pound tax on my morphine and perhaps on someone's chemo. So that's kind of ridiculous, but we're looking for that. So thanks, Danny. Patreon.com/Podbean. No.
Not even close.
Not even close. Do it again.
Patreon.podbean.com/GreenCrushPod. And if you have too much money, feel free to give it to us. Alan just reminded me after 21 episodes, apparently that was my job, was to find money from this somehow. I was kind of just bringing him down here once a week and listening to him, but apparently I was supposed to find money.
Well, we were just trying to do 20 or 30 hours worth of hard work before we actually decided to ask for a favor. So anyway, that's enough shilling for me, for us, for everyone. Danny, thanks for coming in. Danny Mendlow, of course, instrumental in helping me get started. I was on the Mike Richards show as an interviewee. I'd like to give a shout out again to Mike Richards and also Podbean. And, of course, 234 King Street East in Toronto, the fantastic and lovely. I just had a nice lunch here. The Pacific Junction Hotel. All of this brought to you by Eggplant Digital Media. Eggplant Digital Media, some of the most fantastic media creation in Canada, certainly the most innovative. So, okay, let's move on to a different topic, and that is that the Liberals here have got a recriminalization going on, not a decriminalization and not a legalization. It's already got 7 laws against it. They're going to strike those down. And they've got 45 new laws we're going to get busted with later. Some bereft of science inebriation or impairment tests that, they will decide that are accurate even though they aren't. This whole thing stinks here in Canada. Stephen Bronfman's pumping in of money into Justin Trudeau's Liberals. Stephen Bronfman, of course, the heir to the Bronfman family. Used to be called the gang back when they were that. And the licensed producers as well. The LPs do not want thinking cannabis users to organize against them. But it's kind of hard not to. When you attend an Oscars ceremony for self-congratulatory nonsense, these people getting together and patting themselves on the back. And meanwhile, the situation in Canada is that there are some licensed producers who have had quality recalls due to various reasons, mites, toxins, whatever. And it's been the pattern that when this happens, they don't realize it right away, and then they send it out, and then you consume it, and then later they'll toss out a story about, oh, geez, we didn't know that happened. I'm so sorry. There's a recall. Of course, you've already consumed it by then. And we're supposed to trust government to hand us out what we need to eat and to take in. So let's take a look at some of the folks that were there last week. Aurora Cannabis. There's a recall for Aurora Cannabis for medical purposes. Aurora has a recall there, starting date January 13, 2017. They began a voluntary recall of 7 lots of product under a Type 2 recall. This is on the Government of Canada website, by the way. The product that is being recalled includes dried marijuana that was produced by Organigram and sold by Aurora Cannabis Enterprises to their clients. Now, what the hell is a company named Organigram finding substances that are not organic in their weed, and then they cry that, oh, we didn't know it was in there? What is it even doing within the confines of the building? Why are you thinking that you are a legitimate enterprise when you have Organigram is dealing in non-organic substances, and then when they're caught later expressing surprise at being popped? There are a lot of, let's go to Metrum. There was a Metrum recall earlier. That's another company, Metrum. I don't have a lawyer. I don't care. These are all truths. I get to say this. I can talk if there's a recall going on. According to Lyft News, Metrum also voluntarily recalls select products exposed to plant spray. Metrum voluntarily recalling medical cannabis products that were exposed to a foliar plant spray that contains traces of an ingredient that you don't really want to have. It's a pesticide widely used in agriculture, but it was not disclosed by the third-party manufacturer on the list of ingredients. The company says there's no impact on human health or the integrity of the Metrum product. Of course not. That's why they recalled it. We don't have all the time in the world to get to every single recall. But if the government is going to position themselves to say, hey, these are the only guys you can buy from, and that's the best recommendation we can come through a board that's been headed by a friggin' pig, an unprosecuted, rights-abusing G20 son of a bitch who rounded people up in Toronto and put them into concrete holding cells, fencing, removing any kind of access to personal medication, not including marijuana, and leaving people in there for hours and hours. Somehow a lot of these people have fought a case and decided to take the government to task, and some of those people have actually earned and won money from the government for the compensation of having their rights abused by this twaddling, waddling officer of a man who I insist must take a breathalyzer test before he legislates. We don't need any more drunken legislation. If I were an officer, I would suspect him of being hammered most of the time. You know that drinker's face. Come on. And Bill Blair has it in spades. So he needs to step away. He thinks he's actually paid any kind of price. He says he is fully accountable for abusing all of those human rights, but he isn't. And he was rewarded with this post where they are shepherding in such control over the industry on the recommendations of an officer of the law. And when you're an officer who's in charge of the Toronto police force or any urban force, when that happens, whenever you're doing that and then you get a new job, you don't get to maintain any credibility here. You're just the nanny holding the hand, and you got away with it, and you're rolling in it. And if that's not bad enough, the former head of RCMP Drug Squad now leads a business. He is it's a cannabis business. Okay, so this is insane that this gentleman here is the former head of the RCMP Drug Squad, now leading a marijuana business. So we have Julian Fantino, former head cop. We have another RCMP with Julian Fantino. Oh, specifically, ban Alethea, boycott Alethea. You don't want to be paying these people. We want to starve these fuckers out. We don't want them to get any money. You want to grow your own crop, and we're going to have speakeasies. We're going to be doing it wherever we want. I'm trying to organize people just to be aware of how repressive and ridiculous it is. That's all I have to do. The natural need and desire to partake elsewhere will come. But another sign of the legalization of marijuana is spurring a seismic shift in Canadian society. The former head of the RCMP drug squad now runs a pot company. A man who spent years policing the illegal drug trade is part of a new wave of entrepreneurs poised to cash in. I know people still in jail from before who were happy to say, oh no, this is a good product. This is actually a good substance. And it didn't get them out of jail. So I don't understand why these folks think it's an okay thing to do. They have no morals and no center. Okay, this time, this top grunt at the trough is just like Bill Blair and Fantino. Canadian police chiefs who knew early on this was coming, this legalization, and still busting people and now rudely profiting from it. A brand new kind of insider trading. Okay, so it's terrible what they're doing, and but now that we know what's going on and people are aware of it, and people realize soon that it's decriminalization is not the word to use, it's recriminalization. Let's also remember from a guest who presented to the show this very salient point, and from here we will move on to our guest, Rhys Cohen. Alan, we need to have a victory parade to celebrate our victory in the great war on drugs. We're going to award medals. We're going to have speeches. There should be fanfare. And we are soon, from Crush, going to lay out the terms of peace from the side of victory instead of letting the vanquished dictate the terms. So, yeah, there's a tipping point. There's an awareness. I'm not the only one. I'm no genius. I'm just, I've got my finger on this particular pulse because I have a pulse because I use this marijuana to save my life. And if you don't believe that, help yourself to the data. Stop repressing it. I can provide all of this, and I will. We're going to be digitizing this stuff and putting it up on the website so you can see the numbers. And, of course, we'll erase my doctor's name and a few other salient bits and pieces while we do some redacting. But trust me, we're only going to be removing personal bits of information rather than adding anything fake to it. So look forward to that. I'm looking forward to our guest. I'm just going to dial him up now. We're on the Skype. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to have him on the line while we were doing the front end of the show. So here we go with, where the heck is it? You know, you search up the old Skype and where the heck is it? I'm pressing the buttons. It's not coming up. Why is that? That's because it's a live show. That's the reason. Goodness gracious. I don't understand where this thing has gotten to. It was here a second ago. Let's understand that I'm in trouble here, folks, and I'm currently searching for Skype, even though I had already dialed it up. And it was a new format today as well. Really sickening that's happened. Here we go. They always tell you, oh, we've improved things to make it better for you. Not without checking first, and there's always a sideways or backwards move. Okay, so anyway, we're going to call Rhys now. He's been patiently waiting in Australia. He's a fantastic guy. We've already had a chat last night. And are you there, Rhys? Oh, this is wonderful. Okay, are we there, Rhys? Are we there, Rhys? Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay, great, fantastic. Rhys Cohen from Australia. It's already Sunday morning or something for you. How far apart are we in time again?
It's 6:42 in the morning, and I am ready to talk about cannabis.
Fantastic. Okay, Rhys, let me tell you something. You were a young boy at some point. You never heard of cannabis, and eventually you found out about it. Tell us about how that happened.
Oh, gee, I guess my indoctrination into cannabis was pretty similar through high school. As most young Australians would have come across it, it's pretty common over here. I imagine it'd be similar to how things happen in Canada, but beyond sort of social experience, my sort of real curiosity about cannabis came when I was a young undergrad student, and I was really keen to find out about sort of how the social coordination happens between illicit cultivation and illicit consumption, and how price movements affect that. I'm obviously a huge nerd, as you can tell. And I ended up doing my honors thesis on the legalization of cannabis in America in 2015. That's sort of when I really got to grips with the issue.
And where did you hand that thesis in? Which school was it?
Oh, right. That was the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah, which is my alma mater.
And what was the reaction to that paper from your teachers and your instructors?
Yeah, well, I mean, I happened to be lucky to be studying in an incredibly left-wing and open-minded department, which was handy. But even so, people were a bit skeptical. I got a few chuckles, got a few laughs. But I'm not quite at the stage where I can say who's laughing now, but, maybe next year.
So you had to weather the storm of a little bit of criticism, as many as almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. A little bit of criticism. I mean, I've been quite lucky in that I've had the support of my family through my involvement with medical cannabis in Australia, and I think it's starting to be taken a lot more seriously now. When it first started, I mean, a good sort of litmus test is how taxi drivers react to your job and sort of what you do. I find that's like generally a good barometer of like how society's going with a certain issue.
What do they say? What does the taxi driver say to you?
Well, back a couple of years ago, it was, really? So like you're a dealer, and nowadays it's more like, oh yeah, I heard about that. That's the kids who have the epilepsy, right? So we're getting there piece by piece.
Once the cab drivers figure it out, everybody knows it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about Cann10, the medicinal and you're going to have to go slowly because a lot of people in America and Canada, not that we're stupid, but we just don't have these kinds of things, not to my knowledge anyway. This sounds like a very hands-on, progressive situation. So Cann10 is two N's, Cann10 Medicinal Cannabis Leadership Program. What is that? Who set it up and what do you do and what are its goals?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, so the Cann10 is a company. It's originally from Israel. Cann10 Australia is a subsidiary of that, and it's a medicinal cannabis company focused on education and training. So the Medicinal Cannabis Leadership Program was the first ever full-scale cannabis education program in Australia that we put on last September down in Melbourne. And it was a 4-day seminar series, essentially. So we had 16 different speakers across talking across everything from plant botany and cultivation through to chemistry, medical science, regulation and law, and sort of everything in between.
Let me ask you this: the science that you've been able to overturn in this effort, has any of this? And I'm thinking, it's positive science, obviously.
Sure.
Has any of that contributed, do you know, in any kind of way to government parsing over? Has the government checked that stuff out before they've laid out their new rules and regs?
I don't think they did, but they are doing so now.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So the Australian government is set itself up, basically set up this medical cannabis system in Australia. And the premise was that, we would treat cannabis like any other medicine and we would just listen to the science. And if the science said that this is an appropriate medicine, then, it would be made available to those people. They quickly realized that actually we don't know a whole lot about cannabis still as far as medical use goes, at least not in the ways in which, we understand other drugs, medicines. So they have embarked upon a real great program of scientific inquiry. So there's real large-scale clinical trials happening in Australia at the moment, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of medical scientific research going on. Unfortunately, a lot of that is attempting to find out things that are already known in the community. Like, hey, guess what? Cannabis helps manage chronic pain. That's no news to any of your listeners, I'm assuming.
Sure.
But we've never really asked that question in a way that would satisfy sort of medical practitioners in Australia.
But it is considered a medicine. And so
absolutely,
do you tax it?
We tax it in the same way that we would tax any other medicine. So there aren't any special cannabis-specific taxes or anything like that.
Well, what do you think about
which is-
this in Canada? Here we have a tax in Ontario, this large province. They've and I'm sure this will spread like wildfire with these pigs at the
Yeah.
trough. But the taxing at $1 a gram, they're going to sell it at about $1, $10 or $12 or $13 a gram or whatever it is, and then they're going to tax one of those dollars is tax. So that's $454 a pound tax. Do you think you have anything like that going on, or have you managed to clear that hurdle?
Well, unfortunately, Alan, if that was all we had to pay, we would be very, very lucky.
Oh, what else have you? What else are you paying?
Well, I mean, so the kinds of cannabis medicines that we have available at the moment, I mean, patient access in Australia is very restricted still. But the products that we have available might cost someone $10,000 to $30,000 a year to maintain a prescription for.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat yourself? I think you just said it's going to cost a patient $30,000 a year to access.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How is that?
Well, these are highly manufactured and imported pharmaceutical grade cannabis products. We're talking like Sativex level pharmaceutical formats, essentially.
And is there going to be some kind of funding structure or public medicine to take the burden off someone spending $2,000 or $3,000 a month to get through?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, Australia is actually, we've got a really, really good health system usually. And normally medicines don't cost people an arm and a leg in Australia. The problem with cannabis is that it's technically these are unregistered, in inverted commas, unregistered medicines. Like, they're things that we haven't spent 10 years doing clinical trials on. The government hasn't said, yes, this definitely works for X, Y, or Z. They're kind of experimental. That's how we're treating them.
So we're all babes in the woods with a flashlight at this point.
Exactly. Okay. We have no idea what's going on is what the government's saying. So normally for a registered medicine, for like, Panadol or, some, antibiotics, you can have them on what's called a pharmaceutical benefit scheme, which is when the government directly subsidizes the costs of particular medicines. But you can't do that with cannabis medicines yet because they hadn't been registered, and that's about maybe 5 to 10 years away from happening. So in the meantime, yeah, you're stuck with 30 grand a year sometimes. There are some states in Australia that have decided to subsidize these medicines on their own, so not relying on the federal government's system, but sort of putting their hand in their own back pocket. But of course, the only states that are prepared to do that are the ones with the most draconian patient access laws, because the last thing they want to do is ending up spending 30 grand per patient times 20,000 patients. It'll be just a huge cost for them. So yeah, it's a real catch-22.
It is. I think we should establish a floating island nation called Draconia and just send all of these idiots over there to regulate themselves to death.
I think you just described Australia, actually. So
oh, come on. Now, hey, about Australia, I wanted to get into this. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, and it's okay if you don't. But Australia has a lot of different, let's call them natural hazards compared to Canada, different ones.
Oh, yeah.
Out in the outback, I'm sure you've got all kinds of spiders and weird bugs and reptiles nobody's even heard of or seen. And cannabis is very, one of the criticisms of it is, it doesn't work for everything, but it does work well for so many things. Have you had any knowledge or experience on something like some kind of a nasty snake bite venom application, or does it have any kind of indication on that front from some of your more funky animals over there?
Whoa, yeah, that's a really interesting question. Let me think. So you're right. Australia is full of horrible things that want to kill you in painful ways. That's kind of our thing.
Well, that's how you got started, too. I mean, come on.
That's right. Luckily, I don't think anyone's died of snake venom in Australia since the 80s, because if you live in a country full of poisonous things that want to kill you, the first thing you do is invest in lots of anti-venom research. However,
right.
One of the leading causes, our national cancer in Australia is melanoma cancer, because we have really strong sun. We've got a thin ozone layer down here. Australians suffer at extraordinary rates from
You look like you might be
melanoma
one of
cancer.
those main sufferers. No offense.
Yeah, right. Like I clearly should not be in Australia.
Yeah, you look like a
Thanks,
fair-haired
Mum and
Irish
Dad.
guy who
Yeah.
never sees sun at all, actually.
That's right. So melanoma is a big issue over here, and one of the research projects that's currently underway at the University of Canberra is researching, how we might be able to use cannabis to treat melanoma cancers. So I guess in that way, cannabis is being explored as part of a treatment for, some unique Australian conditions, maybe not the plants and animals, but definitely the natural environment.
Yeah, it's fascinating to go down some of these roads with a clear conscience and trying to apply it because if it's so good for so many different things. Unlike a lot of
Yeah.
medications, it's like one
Mhm.
medication is specifically for heart
Right.
disease and another one is for whatever. But that would be pretty cool to find
Yeah.
out that we've got another inroad there. So tell us
Yeah.
about this program. Who gets into this program where they are able to learn historical, cultural, legal, regulatory, commercial, all of the aspects in the
Yeah.
chemical and agricultural,
Mm.
agricultural and chemical aspects. Is this a school or do people apply for this?
Yeah, well, it's a private enterprise, so anyone's encouraged to get in touch and to enroll and to participate. I mean, it's not an incredibly cheap experience, but it is a valuable one, and the people that we've had come through so far have found a lot of value in it. We ran it in partnership with Deakin Co, which is like the one of the arms of corporate training arm of Deakin University, which is a university down in Melbourne. So it's designed in the same way as an undergrad sort of seminar series might run, but it's not an accredited university course yet. That's something that's being worked on at the moment.
Okay. And how long does it take to complete the course?
So the one we ran in September was four
That's
full
4 days.
days.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 full days, and then a couple of additional events sort of in and around it.
And then you've got graduates. How many people graduated this time? Did everyone pass?
Oh yeah, well it's we don't have tests or assessments, but we had 30 people come through and graduate, and 30 happy campers. So it was quite an experience. We had 30 participants and we had 16 facilitators over 4 days. So
That's
um,
incredible. That's a great ratio.
yeah, that's the right ratio to have, I think. I mean, I've had some experience teaching undergrads myself, and I tell you what, if you have class sizes that are getting up to where they are now, it becomes impossible to have a real sort of conversation. So keeping it nice and intimate is what we're aiming for.
And that's a great idea. So I'd like to come down there and do it, but it's going to be too far, too time consuming right away. So this was your first wave in September. That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
And how often are you going to try to do this throughout the course of the year? Is it a once a year thing or every few months?
We'll ramp it up. So we're looking to run another one around March, this time in Sydney. But it's early days. I mean, we're trying to grow sort of as the industry's growing at the same time. It's all very new over here still. We only had medical cannabis legalized in February 2016. So it really hasn't been that far down the track yet.
Right.
But,
Tell me about these practical tools that they learn. All of these students, these 16 folks, and they are that's just going to help them build different things like commercial projects. You say scientific projects. So give me an example of one of those. Like, what's a commercial project, for example, from the ground up? Like, this is something dreamed up out of nowhere, or how would someone take this knowledge and bring it to the field of this usage?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. Well, I mean, starting, an LP in Australia is no small task. It's probably a lot harder and more financially costly than in Canada at the moment. And one of the things so I do commercial consulting as well as my involvement with Cann10. So I speak with a lot of people who are looking to start plant touching businesses in some way, shape, or form. And the real challenges they have, besides access to capital, is just speaking to the right people at the right time and networking. So knowing who to call on if you need a lawyer, knowing who to call on if you need to source plant genetics, knowing
Sorry,
who
if
to
you
put in
need
your
to what?
license
Sorry,
application.
if you need
Source plant genetics. Sorry,
Oh, I
my
see.
accent's pretty heavy.
No,
Especially
it was
this time
just the
of
speed
morning.
of it. Yeah, it was just the speed
Oh,
of it.
okay.
Sourcing
Yeah.
plant genetics. Okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. Sure.
Yeah, and just putting people in, like making sure that you have a network of people that you can draw on for expertise. So we had a few people come through the program who are at the early stages of building their own plant touching companies. Plenty of people from the horticulture and hydroponic equipment sort of side of things. Some chemists, a GP, a few pharmacists, a nurse. So it was quite a diverse group of people. And as you know, people get involved with cannabis for a whole number of different reasons.
Sure.
The idea was to have something that could provide a good base level of knowledge to everyone.
Yeah.
For them to go forward and do do what they want with that knowledge, whatever that might mean to them.
Well, it's always been a goal of mine to get to your country, and I'd love to get down there sometime. But since I don't know much about it, how do you feel about here in Canada, and I guess in the States and all over from where I've read, there are a lot of doctors and MDs and nurses, as you say, on board with this. They're actively trying to get it going and trying it in different applications. And then there are other doctors who just absolutely refuse. No, that's all nonsense. None of that works. It's all bullshit. Like my first guy that basically showed me the door to this planet on the way out, and I decided he was wrong. There's a lot of doctors, and they're coming out of the same schools. I mean, you have to learn how to be a doctor. Can you understand why it is that some of them are so on board with this, and others tell you it's nothing more than wives' tale?
Yeah, it's funny. I think most doctors would start out with not much knowledge of cannabis because, like you say, it's not something that's really taught in the course of them being trained as a doctor. Most good doctors are open-minded about most things and are humble to some extent and are prepared to learn from their patients as well as from other areas. And I think, in my experience, the difference between a doctor that's interested in exploring cannabis and a doctor that isn't is whether or not they've had a patient who's come to them and shown them in the flesh that cannabis can work, So
right.
I've spoken to doctors who say, hey, I didn't really think much about cannabis, but then one of my patients came in and, normally their pain is at, a 7 out of 10 most days, and they find it difficult to walk. But today, they walked in and they were happy and smiling, and they said, yeah, hey, guess what? I got some black market cannabis oil. And it's changed my life, and they get to see that in reality. I think that's been a real key difference.
That's the hands-on thing, right? That's the hands-on
totally.
thing, because you know what? I've got hands-on, and I got out of this by using it. And I used to get really upset and angry at people because of another medication I was on, and because I was so frustrated that people wouldn't believe me while I was telling the truth. So in the early days, if you countered me, I might have been a little more salty than I ought to have been. But then I realized later on, this is so amazing what's happened to me as I've turned the corner and gotten out of trouble of death-wise and been able to maintain and recapture a life on this planet. I couldn't believe it. So I mean, I don't blame people anymore. I broaden my perspectives as well. Keeping on using this stuff, broaden my perspective. You can't expect people to understand this so fully until, such as yourself, you got your hands ready to some educational, creative aspect, or someone like myself. Like, I really don't expect people to understand it until they've actually, you don't know what it's like to ride a horse until you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can read about it till you, as long as you want, but. It's so great that you're doing this. Are you aware of, I guess you're aware of Dr. Raphael Meshulam of Israel?
Yes. Yeah. I've had just a couple of email conversations with him. But
do share some of those. Can you tell me? We're trying to get a hold of this guy. I mean, he's been doing this stuff since I was in diapers. And I'm sure he has much to do with any kind of advancement from this. I always think of him coming from Israel, and you say you're connected in that way. So tell us about some of your experiences with him, or what he thinks, or where you guys are. What are you talking about? Let's see your emails,
Well, it wasn't an in-depth conversation with him, but I've been in occasional contact. Our colleagues back in Israel work closely with Professor Meshulam in developing some of the educational materials, and he's a bit of an elder statesman over there. So
Sure.
he's the sort of person who will open up big conferences and be a keynote speaker at various events. But I think he's in the process, as all good academics should be, of handing on the baton, so to speak.
Okay, so
So
what
there's
he was the guy that identified THC as a component back in '62 or '3 or something, and so
That's right.
What's his position, personally speaking, or from whatever you can glean on this as a powerful, medicine like a cancer fighter or another autoimmune disease and a lot of things that trouble folks?
Yeah, well, I think Meshulam's, as you say, his greatest contributions have been the most foundational, scientific discoveries about, the endocannabinoid system and 2-AG and anandamide and THC, and that was incredibly groundbreaking stuff that really set the scene for the kind of research that's going on at the moment in Israel and around the world. So. One of his proteges is an academic called Dedi Meiri, who's at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I believe. Or I could be wrong, could be at the Technion. But he's another Israeli researcher who is sort of, I guess, in the process of taking on Meshulam's role as the global Israeli scientist. And we were lucky enough to have Dedi deliver a talk as part of the Cann10 program. He did it remotely. From Israel, where he sort of explained his current research, which is focused at the moment on cancer and anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids.
And what's his name again, this doctor?
Yeah, David, Meire.
Neire. Okay.
M for Mary, yeah.
Because the reason I
M-E-I-R.
ask is, as enamored as I am with Dr. Meshulam, as so happy as I am that he is there and has been doing this work, let's get serious. He's almost 100 years old.
He's done a lot of stuff. Yep, he is definitely getting up there.
And so we need to make sure he effectively passes the baton of whatever it is. This is a valuable human being, and I would hate to see him, his works to sort of fall by the wayside simply because it wasn't here anymore. And you never hear about him in Canada. They never look him up in the States or England or Ireland when they're looking at the science of it. They'll just say, well, these police officers believe something, and they told the politicians who also believe something, and they never go to the hard data from people such as this. And that's incredible with the political support Canada gives Israel as well. So I'm just trying to get past that conundrum.
Yeah. Well, I think Professor Meshulam is on the scientific advisory board of a Canadian LP. So if you wanted to track him down, you might do well to do it through that avenue. But what's really exciting about what's happened in Australia, at least since February 2016, is between the philanthropists and the government, we've put maybe close to $50 million into cannabis, medical cannabis research just in the last couple of years, and got research programs happening at maybe half a dozen or a dozen universities across the country now. And what that's doing is giving a lot of Australian scientists some real hands-on experience researching cannabis. And I think that, combined with the efforts still coming out of Israel, combined with the kinds of amazing stuff we see coming out of North America. It's a bit different because I think, especially in the States, right? Like, you can basically do whatever you want as far as, scientific research goes, so long as you're happy to have it sort of under the shadow of federal prohibition, But in Australia and in Canada and other places, you can sort of do it in the light of day, which is a bit nicer.
Yeah, well, they just made a big deal about dronabinol, which is a synthetic cannabis something or other. I don't really know what it is.
Synthetic THC, I think, right?
Yeah, synthetic THC. Now, I don't know if I trust that or not. Have you got any information on that over there? Where are you guys with that? Because they've got this synthetic version that
Yeah.
obviously isn't as well tested as this other thing that's been kicking around for 5,000 years. But they're telling us that it's now going to be a Schedule II drug because it will be helpful to people, and it won't be as, which is to me, I don't know if it's disingenuous or not. I can't say that. I haven't researched it. But have you got any insight on that fake one?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty obscene, isn't it, that you would say, dronabinol, which is a synthetic version of delta-9 THC, has medical benefits, but cannabis, which contains delta-9 THC, has no medical benefits and should remain a Schedule 1. I mean, not that we needed more examples of the ridiculous hypocrisy of U.S. drug policy, but, here's another one, right?
Yeah.
What's really interesting about dronabinol and marinol and like the other single chemical synthetic cannabis medicines is that they fit really, really neatly into the existing framework of like how people do pharmaceutical medicine. They're single chemical, single target. They're well known chemically speaking. You don't have to worry about the entourage effect or, minor cannabinoids or, these other things, right? So they're really attractive to people who are most comfortable doing traditional pharmaceutical R&D, So
but I don't care how comfortable those people are. They're
exactly right. Yeah, no, I'm with you. The thing is that it's actually, according to all the evidence that we have at the moment, people don't like using synthetic cannabis products or even single cannabinoid cannabis products. You take an isolated THC to manage your nausea versus a whole plant extract, which includes THC to manage your nausea. And so far, it seems that patients really don't like the single chemical versions.
Yeah, I've heard it feels terrible.
Right. And you end up usually, according to the evidence we have at the moment, getting a much better therapeutic outcome with the whole plant products. So even though, it's easier to do, traditional pharmaceutical R&D on a single chemical, marinol or whatever, or dronabinol, people don't want it, like it doesn't work as well.
It could be it could be the convulsions, or it might be the heart attacks, that kind of thing that might be a problem. There are
really put a crimp on your day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it just really messes me up when I'm trying to get past something. I take a government approved item that's going to bring me down. And when this other stuff is so healthful and available. So what's your take on other countries in the world? Who's at the forefront? I mean, Portugal, they don't have any laws against it, so that's at the forefront. We also don't consult them too much when we make laws in Canada. But what about Spain and various other countries? Have you got a read on some of their ways and means regarding this turning point?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it really depends on what you desire in cannabis regulations, because clearly, places like California have excellent patient access. Like, anyone, or soon, anyone can walk into a store and get cannabis if they want it. So, you don't have that barrier, and it's reasonably affordable, and you don't have that barrier, which is great. But, as in California, your quality regulations might not be there yet. As far as, specific product labeling, there was a report came out recently about the mislabeling of CBD products in North America. It seems pretty awful. So in, what you gain in patient access, you tend to lose out in regulated quality standardized products, if you know what I mean. So Portugal's super interesting because, their drug policy has been really effective, not just across cannabis, but all drugs in reducing, overdose deaths, reducing crime. And we've actually had quite a few Australian politicians go and visit Portugal to look at their drug policies. And they've come back to Australia, even some very conservative politicians, and said, hey, I know it's crazy, but like we've seen it and it works. Let's have a think about it.
Okay. Stop. I'm afraid that we might actually have some government people in Canada listening, and I hate them to get all IBS going or something with all of your facts coming out. It's amazing because these people, here it is from 2015 in U.S. News and World Report, that during March of 2015, many young men came to the hospital acting extremely violent and confused. They tested positive for what seemed to be cannabis. but the dosages were much higher than anticipated because these kinds of dronabinol and synthetics are higher than that. And they had used the synthetic marijuana. There were 160 synthetic pot people, synthetic pot users, 160 sent to hospitals in April of 2015 in New York. And I mean, this is on U.S. News and World Report. Alabama public health officials shared that nearly 100 people had been hospitalized for problems linked to synthetic marijuana just between March and April, just in 2015. I don't have any update on that. But K2, Spice, Green Giant, this kind of thing, bought at certain places cheaply. But it's coming from Chinese and Pacific Rim countries and commercial chemistry labs, and I really don't understand how folks can put this into the mainstream while they demonize what's obviously natural. But
it's horrible. I mean, this is the in inverted commas synthetic marijuana. Products that cause people so much harm, like you've described. Usually they don't even have any cannabinoids in them. Like, usually they are completely chemically not at all related to cannabis. But in the news, they're still called synthetic marijuana. Because that's how they're marketed to people.
And they're also marketed on the news. I've seen reports before where someone's had an issue and they just come down heavy. Oh, this is a bad time for marijuana. Exactly. Look, they're trying to legalize marijuana. This is terrible. And then they at the bottom of the story is like, and it was dronabinol. Anyway, they don't tell you it was the actual bud,
itself. You know what's funny is that in New Zealand they've created a law like to avoid some of these problems, because one of the problems here is that you ban a chemical entity, and then some clever guy in a lab comes up with a new chemical entity that becomes K2, and it takes 6 months before that new chemical entity gets banned, and you sort of have this lag effect. In New Zealand they put a law in place that said, okay, whoa, slow down everybody, you can't sell any new chemical entity until we've approved it. So they sort of reversed it. So that sort of put a stop
instead of chasing it afterwards.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, they were like, okay, blanket prohibition on everything that we haven't said yes to yet. If you want to sell it, you got to come through us first, and we got to test it and make sure it's not, something awful that's going to harm people. Which works well for the stuff you can buy in stores legally, but of course does nothing to affect the black market.
Yeah. So give us, just before you go, give us a few more places that you figure are leading the way. I know you've expressed excitement about Canada's political turn. I'm a little less enthusiastic than you are, but I understand we have geographical difference of awareness. But what would you say are the top 5 countries that are the most scientifically ahead of it, the most progressive, the most law-friendly to the user, partaker, medicinal or otherwise?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess Germany would probably be getting up there. I mean, it's exciting to see such a huge country, especially in Europe, take such a huge step towards cannabis legalization. I don't know how well it's working at the moment, but I wish them the very best. And I know there's lots of Canadian companies getting involved there, helping them get set up. I'm excited that New Zealand is going to probably legalize adult use cannabis within the next, say, 4 or 5 years.
What kind of cannabis?
Adult use, recreational cannabis.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So they had a new prime minister recently, and she said that within 3 years, she's going to hold a referendum on legalizing recreational cannabis. That's pretty cool. In terms of science, Israel is definitely still up there for sure. What's been interesting is seeing so many research collaborations between Australian companies and Chilean and South American groups.
Oh, South American companies. Okay, now you're talking. Chile, that's great.
Chilean, so there's one of our big companies over here called Cann10. They have a partnership with the DEA Foundation, which is a group in Chile, and together they're actually cultivating, and they're running clinical trials in Chile, and eventually that's going to sort of bleed into the rest of South America. There's been some talk recently about Brazil, moving towards domestic cultivation. Which would be pretty huge because how many Brazilians there are.
Yeah, and the geography. I mean, it's huge.
Vast country.
And you could grow anywhere there. You wouldn't have to worry about winter. Any place down there.
basically made for it.
Yeah.
Or especially, towards the west, near the mountains.
Sure.
But I'm really curious to find out more about Mexico's move towards medical cannabis. Because to me, I think globally speaking, the real tipping point is going to be when the US makes a move towards legalizing medical or adult use cannabis. I think that's going to be a huge point in our history, right?
Are you being attacked by a jumbo jet right now? What's going on?
Sorry, I live in Sydney, which has an airport in the
okay.
city.
All right.
Okay,
no problem. Just checking I wasn't on a different feed all of a sudden.
No, you're all good.
Yeah.
But anyway, but as soon as we have Mexico in the south with medical, you got Canada in the north with adult use and medical. You got all of the West Coast. I think that'll finally put enough pressure on the U.S. federal government to actually do something. And when that happens, that's when the global transformation will begin, I believe.
Oh goodness! So we're sitting here waiting for the U.S. to do the right thing, and are you familiar at all with this man by the name of Jeff Sessions?
I may have come across him once or twice. Yeah.
He's Trump's. He's the guy under Trump that wants to shut all of this down somehow.
That's right. Yeah. Well, good luck to him. Yeah, try putting that genie back in the bottle. Mate.
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, listen, I hope you could come back on the show sometime, Rhys. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I sure do appreciate the time difference. We entertain the notion of pre-recording this because, but I'm so glad you're able to get up at 6 in the morning.
Oh, man.
I hope you still have a good rest of your day tomorrow while I'm finishing up yesterday today.
Great. Well, look, I wouldn't do it for many people, Alan, but I'll happily do it for you. So thanks for having me on the show. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Rhys. And once again, give us the name of your organization. Give us some details on where folks can find you if they're interested in perhaps going there and participating, or at least keeping tabs on your developments that are so important to this burgeoning new industry of awareness. And
thanks a lot. Yeah, so you can check it out at cann10.com.au, or you can find me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to find me. Get in touch, say hi. Always happy to have a chat.
I read you loud and clear.
All right, Rhys. Well, thanks very much, and we will get in touch with you again. I'm looking forward to seeing how your program that just went by in September develops, and it brings me a lot of comfort to understand and remember that while I'm in here slinging the muck against these monsters, that not everybody's a monster. There's a lot of intelligent, well-appointed, researched folks. It also shoots down the notion that, anybody involved in cannabis has nothing to contribute to society. This is another myth of theirs that's easily blown up by speaking to a gentleman such as yourself. So thanks for presenting yourself for us, and we really appreciate it here at Green Crush.
Too kind. Thanks very much, Alan.
All right. Take care.
Cheerio.
That's Rhys Cohen, no longer with us online, but with us in spirit and memory, and we will definitely be touching down with his program again and trying to understand what's going on there with this fantastic, healthful substance. But in the meantime, before we get back to what I'd like to do next, a different little segment that we are going to do. I talked about it last week, how all of this gets into play in the first place. And when I mean that, I'm talking about how in Canada specifically, and you should listen if it's in the States, because these folks were involved in your history as well, the Bronfman gang. We're going to take that in right now before we wrap the show. I just want to say that this situation of shoehorning in a series of repressive laws that we are now taking control over, we see what's been going on. We understand it's been a very, extremely disingenuous campaign by this Justin Trudeau, who, while campaigning, was acting as though it were the greatest thing and people would be interested. And even the Emerys were supporting Justin's campaign because it seemed so counterpoised to the rough and tumble conservatives who'd have nothing to do with this, that they sucked a lot of people in, as they say. And for this G20 rights abuser to get away with this kind of thing, I don't know. Sometimes my blood boils and I don't know what to do with myself, but I honestly, I just feel like it's his fault and that he should be taken down,
Because I'm
get him. The Honorable
Bill Blair
should go right to fucking jail. The son of a bitch is guilty. That man is guilty. That man there. That man is a slime. He is a slime. If he's allowed to go free, then something really wrong is going on here.
And something really wrong is going on. This is from Dope Inc., the book that drove Henry Kissinger crazy, like he wasn't already. Here we go with page 269 of the very famous Dope Inc. Check that out, DOPE, INC, period. Here we go. Let's get a little reading music here. Can we do that? We'll get right to this this fantastic revelatory publication, which recently, in the past couple of years, had a reprinting, and it highlights a lot of the chicanery emanating forth from Her Majesty the Queen, as they call her. That's not meant as any kind of respectful utterance from myself. I'm referring to her because that's what they do call her, Her Majesty the Queen. Everybody's excited about the new dress worn by the new gal who's going to marry the old prince. But this is more important and to the point. So here we go with a little bit of something in the background. Here we go. The Bronfman family is best known to Americans through its ownership of Seagram, the biggest liquor company in North America. The family's holdings stretched from whiskey, banking, mining, real estate, and, although somewhat less publicized, narcotics. Today they are regarded as respectable and outstanding philanthropists whose name is attached to everything important in Canada and Israel, be it government, business, or cultural affairs. This was not always the public profile of the Bronfman family. Less than 50 years ago, they were known to be the biggest bootleggers in North America and were referred to by the less prestigious title the Bronfman Gang. The Bronfmans have always been beholden to the Hofjuden elite. The first member of the family to come to North America was Yechiel Bronfman, a grist mill owner from Bessarabia, Romania, who later anglicized his name. And let's get into exactly how they did this thing. In Yiddish, Bronfman means liquor man, and the hotel business put the Bronfmans in good position to take advantage of the 1915 advent of Canadian Prohibition. Bronfman hotels became boozariums. Prohibition, enacted on orders from the Privy Council as the prelude to the 1920s U.S. Prohibition and birth of organized crime, catapulted the Bronfmans into the multimillionaire bracket, and that's in the turn of the century, and a status as the untouchable kingpins of crime in North America. During Canada's 4 dry years from 1915 to 1919, the Bronfmans established their contacts with U.S. criminal figures for illegally importing liquor into Canada. In 1916, the Bronfmans established their first link with the opium trade proper. Sam and A. Bronfman, 2 of Yechiel's 4 sons, collaborated with the Hudson's Bay Company, a big Canadian company now owned by an American, in which the Keswick family of Jardine Matheson had controlling interest to buy the Canadian Pure Drug Company. In this way, the Bronfmans rushed into the loophole in the War Measures Act that permitted the distribution by pharmacists of alcohol for, here it comes, medicinal purposes. Is this all starting to sound like a bit of a plan? I think it kind of is. It's very similar to what's going on right now with the prohibition of cannabis in Canada. When prohibition in Canada ended in 1919 and prohibition in the United States began, the Bronfmans simply turned from whiskey importing to whiskey exporting. After it was all over in May 1936, the Bronfmans agreed to pay $1.5 million to settle their account with the U.S. Treasury. The sum amounted to an admission that half the liquor that came into the United States during Prohibition was from the liquormans. And I put it to you that the revelation of the recent Paradise Papers, which identifies Stephen Bronfman, the heir to this fortune of which I speak, at the helm of this particular family fortune, He's got access to Granddaddy's old papers. They know what the template is. They've done the same thing again, and we will be having speakeasies ourselves, and we will be countering the official turn at every turn. So very much looking forward to the victory that we are now enjoying, the awareness as it bleeds out. I am not the only one saying these things, and a lot of people are ready to get on board with it. So, speaking of bored with it, I hope you weren't. I'm so glad we had a wonderful time today with Rhys Cohen. He will be back on the show. He exposes the lie, at the very least, that nothing good can come from cannabis. It's such a fairy tale. And Kathleen Wynne, if you're listening, where is this continuing dialogue you promised me that has been recorded for history? Perhaps not on your website, but definitely on ours. I would like to know where this continuing dialogue of yours is all about, because I'm hitting your tweets every day and I'm telling you that you're very hypocrisy-laden. It's embarrassing. You should clean yourself up a little bit and tell the friggin' truth once in a while. That's what this show is about.
We just had a rotten nightmare, that's all. Now we're awake and everything's gonna be fine.